Hi there. Good afternoon. I'm Andy Abbott. Thanks very much to Jill Park for inviting me today to talk to you about the Uniday residency programme that I'm curating for Città dell'Arte Fondazione Pistoletto in Biella in Italy. I'm actually coming to you today from Halifax in West Yorkshire, which, if you don't know, is a former mill town in the north of England. Just before I get into sort of giving you a bit of info about the residency itself, I'll give you some sort of background on me and where it's come from. Yeah, I'm an artist and been sort of based around sort of Leeds, Bradford, West Yorkshire area since 2003. I work in a socially engaged way, so that often involves a lot of sort of co-production with audiences and communities that will experience the work that I make. And often working in public settings outside of galleries. And the sort of themes of my work or the interests are around sort of alternative forms of work and play and post-work futures. I've worked as a sort of individual in different sorts of collaborations and collectives, including Black Dogs, and often in higher education sort of contexts. So that's led to me getting a practice-led PhD from University of Leeds in 2012 around art, self-organisation and post-capitalist subjectivity. And yeah, an arm of what I do is also sort of around art organising as a practice. I've been a producer and curator and now visiting research curator for Uniday at Città dell'Arte. So for those that don't know, Città dell'Arte is the foundation of Michelangelo Pistoletto, the artist who's involved or a key part of the Arte Povera movement in Italy. And it's a centre for it's for investigating art as an interconnected kind of practice that's themed around art for the responsible transformation of society. And amongst a lot of the activities they do is a core part since 1999 has been this Uniday residency that brings together different practitioners from across the world, often at a kind of emerging stage in their career, to sort of share and develop their practice and think about it in terms of its potential for responsible transformation of society, or what we'd call sort of socially engaged practice now. So I was invited to be I actually did the residency in 2006 with my partner, Yvonne Carmichael, and we developed a project looking at links between Biella, which is where Città dell'Arte is, as a sort of former textiles town, and textiles towns in the north of England as well. So yeah, through that initial kind of connection with them, I was invited to be visiting research curator for the sort of 2020 to 2022 programme. And the kind of focus that I was wanting to look at was looking at embedded arts practice as a kind of almost like a sub-discipline of more generally socially engaged art. So really thinking about practices that involve some kind of long-term commitment or engagement in a place, that are sort of durational, that are probably likely to be co-produced in some way with the people from there, and artist as a kind of catalyst for social change in that area. But yeah, to really think about, well, how do we sort of share and unpick these kind of practices together that are often incredibly local, that are very sort of based in a specific place? What's the kind of role of a residency to help kind of share those? Because obviously they're not things that are done quickly. They can't sort of be started and finished in 10 weeks, but there still must be some kind of benefit to creating a network and some kind of way of bringing these different practices from different parts of the world together. The big context for the residency, of course, was also the pandemic. So normally, the way the residency runs is to bring sort of maybe 30 practitioners together for a period of time in Città dell'Arte to sort of talk and engage in a program together and share what they're doing. But in the kind of time of international, restricted international travel and social distancing, the format that we came up for that was to offer a 10-week program that was kind of 90% online, so through online webinars and kind of other ways of connecting people up. which I'll talk about in a second, but also to offer still a kind of 1 week intensive to small groups that could come to Biella or take part in it remotely, where they kind of, yeah, for 1 week of that 10-week program were really sort of focused on unpacking and testing out their own practice with a different group of people, or with in a different context. So the participants kind of came from all over the world. We had a lot from sort of Italy and Western Europe, but also from Palestine and India and Tasmania. So really got a lot of different kind of perspectives that were brought together, including Catalina Gomez Herrera, who was working on a project in Colombia looking at alternative education sort of resource for people at risk of digital poverty in Colombia that sort of celebrated indigenous knowledge. Zina Zaror, who was an artist looking at conditions of imprisonment in Palestine, and Oreki Darsino, which is a collaboration between two artists that we've tried to create, or what we're interested in exploring, an alternative education program, and they kind of use the residency as a way to test out different methods with the rest of the group for that project. So the kind of methods that we used included this Padlet space, which was a kind of like online studio where people would give updates about their projects, and that helped sort of make connections between what people were doing in their specific places. We also invited in guests as mentors and presenters that were sort of mirrors for some of those practices. So that included South Square Centre in Bradford, and In Situ in East Lancashire, Sandy Halal from Decolonising Architecture, and curator Eva Rosen. So that was a kind of webinar program every Saturday where all these residents came together and took part in a Q&A, and also kind of small workshops together. For those residents that were able to visit Biella, we also programmed kind of small visits to kind of organisations and different sites of interest that might relate to their practice. And yeah, a really key part of the residency experience that we didn't want to lose, even though a lot of it was kind of increasingly made virtual throughout those 10 weeks, was the sort of informal learning and the kind of self-organized aspects of kind of a residency program. So we kind of managed to find ways of doing that through Zoom parties and cabarets and kind of other ways of sharing who we were and what we were about with each other, that some of which came from the residents themselves. Sort of other key part of the residency was really looking at traces. So as I mentioned, these kind of embedded practices often very sort of long-term durational projects. They don't have a sort of clear beginning and an end, but we really wanted to encourage the idea that it's useful to still sort of take moments where you try and crystallize or condense or sort of create a trace or a moment of where that project's at to mark it and be able to share it with other people and get some other perspectives. So we invited people to do that at the end of their 1 week intensive and at the end of the residency, and that became a small exhibition in the space where you could start to sort of connect up what was happening in the different practices, but also a webzine, which I'll put the link for before. So yeah, it kind of I would say the benefits of the project definitely helped create a sort of peer-to-peer network for all these practitioners that are often sort of engaged in very local activities, to give them sort of wider perspective and some critical distance on what they're doing, and help sort of promote some new relationships and collaborations as well. Through these kind of traces, we're able to identify almost like shared methods or shared kind of approaches that kind of were common across all these different very specific kind of projects. So projects that were about growing or used growing, food production and kind of an engagement with nature, projects that were about communicating, caring or care, listening and observing, burning, living, dreaming. And really, that kind of helped to sort of, identify some, sort of shared approaches between that group, but also, the kind of, a really important part was just that sort of, feeling of being together in a very tumultuous kind of time where a lot of people were sort of having to kind of rethink their practice and could find it very sort of debilitating and blocking to do that, whereas this kind of way of bringing together people together at that certain moment really gave them the confidence to continue to develop their projects in new ways and think about what's next. So the kind of outcome for the project was, a sort of shared group of questions that we also were able to kind of say this is common concerns through through this diverse range of practices. from what are the future of artist residencies and collaborative works to specific things about the way the pandemic's affected us. But this kind of key question that came out was, how can we create sustainability for ourselves and our worlds? And that's been a sort of the baton from the past residency into the one that I'm currently curating. So that's kind of looking more specifically at the kind of current condition that we're in as an opportunity to be creating new worlds and rethinking the way that the infrastructure and the groundwork that's kind of required for these practices operates. So the quote that we've pulled here from Suzanne Jones: place-specific activists and interest groups in arts and culture spheres perceive the pandemic's exceptional circumstances as opportunity to imagine a radically different, fairer, inclusive arts ecology. So perhaps this idea that a different or another art world is possible is something that we're kind of interested in exploring throughout the residency. So these questions are underpinning what we're looking at the moment. What new ecologies of practice exist that can be formed? What spaces and places can this grow? What are the conditions that are required for those to grow? And again, what groundwork is required, and how do we get started in the here and now? The current residency that's kind of ongoing now is another group of like 36 international artists that are going to be using a similar sort of method of a shared Padlet space, a shared studio, virtual studio space, the kind of 1 week intensives that most people will take part in at a distance or virtually, but if they're able to travel and willing to travel to Biella, they can take part in them there, and a seminar series, a webinar series of guests that will also act as mentors that range from artists and academics like Catherine Gibson and Joanna van Heesvik, to sort of collectives, the independents, workers co-ops, wharf chambers, people working in disability and arts as well, and kind of people that are generally sort of interested in creating the infrastructure for a different art world to emerge. Just to kind of share a few thoughts or questions at the end about sort of the doing this in coronavirus times, what's been learned, what's kind of useful from it, what might we pick up on. I would say that the kind of, for artists involved in that kind of embedded type of practice, the pandemic and the associated lockdowns have been, a good opportunity, forced opportunity to really reflect and focus on the local and what's on your doorstep, and kind of think about it in terms of, what can I do if I'm stuck in this place, what can I do to sort of make a change there? So that's been quite useful for artists that are often sort of being asked to parachute in and kind of go and do projects in places they're not necessarily from, kind of to sort of focus on their neighborhood for a while. There's an element of kind of, benefit to that about kind of this way of working in a more remote distance way, as we probably talked about with, remote working in other areas as being a little more ecologically sound and potentially a more sustainable way of working anyway. There's been a lot of kind of interest in playing around with, what role digital tools can play in this, and how kind of creating those virtual spaces, thinking about sort of digital space, virtual space as public space, can help reach otherwise inaccessible participants and people that weren't part of it, but equally highlighting the kind of barriers that exist there for people, either because of digital poverty, because they haven't got access to the internet or the devices that they need to get involved in that, but also the kind of the actual quality of some of the digital experiences that we're offering. I think people are really getting sick of another Zoom call, but how can we sort of make this space much more sort of like the kind of informal, self-organized, lively, spontaneous spaces that we get in real life. So the sort of main thoughts that we've got at the end of this, or the kind of, to wrap it up, is really to kind of think that obviously there's been sort of benefits and new ways of working that have been brought together. I think the way in which artists have kind of found and innovatively sort of found ways of kind of connecting and sharing during this time has been really quite moving, an amazing thing to be part of, and I'm glad I've sort of been able to sort of help curate that during the time that we've been in. But yeah, when we're kind of talking about this post-pandemic future and kind of what art practice will look like after that, I think it's important to recognise that we're not talking about a pandemic where the effects of coronavirus have been forgotten, or kind of where they don't exist anymore. I really feel like this is something that we'll be living with forever. It's changed the way that we'll kind of interact. It's changed the way that we interact with each other and public space as well. And so really, how the challenge for us is then is, what do we sort of keep from before? What do we sort of build on? What do we need to improve? What do we discard? And what can we sort of radically rethink? And I think that artists and artist residencies are really sort of helping to do that, that radical rethinking. So I look forward to talking to you later on about it. Thanks again for listening, and I'll speak to you soon.